Alright guys, today we're going to be reviewing Unit 9, which was a pretty short and sweet unit. The test is typical number of questions, goes up to 14, and we're going to be going over this together today. So expect a long video, but you know it's worth it to spend the time to review. So yeah. Alright, so let's start. For the part 1 questions, number 1, we are going to find which of the following is equivalent to 2 rad 75. So that means we need to simplify. So remember, you can use your calculator if you need to, but hopefully you know that we can divide 75 by 25. So we're going to do 25 times 3. And remember, when you simplify, you put the perfect square first. So this becomes 2 times 5 rad 3, which becomes 10 rad 3. Choice 2. Number 2, the equation below has the form y equals square root of x minus h plus k. Which of the following must be the value of h plus k? So remember, the h and the k represent how this has been shifted. So if this would have begun, if it was a regular square root of x graph, it would have started here. And so in order to find h and k, we have to see how it's been shifted. So we start from the origin and we're going to count. So we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the right. And then we went down 1, 2, 2 down. And so we have to remember our patterns. So if we went 6 to the right, remember we said it's going to be the opposite of what we would think. So instead of being x minus 6, it was probably going to be, instead of x plus 6, which would be right, it would be minus 6. So that makes us think that we would be going to the left, but we're actually going to the right. And then the down is minus 2. Okay, so our h is 6. And our k is negative 2. And so when we do h plus k, which is what they're asking us, we do 6 plus negative 2, which is 4. Okay, so that's choice 4. So remember, be careful, because even though we did minus 6, the formula says minus h, and so h is still positive 6. Okay? Number 3, which of the following sums could result in an irrational number? So remember, if you have a perfect square, it's not going to be irrational. So these are 2 rational numbers added together. So obviously this is not going to give us an irrational number. This is a perfect square, so this is going to be 5 plus a half. So that's going to be rational. 100 is a perfect square, so that's going to give me 10 plus 4, obviously rational. Square root of 20 is not a perfect square, so this number is irrational. And if I'm adding an irrational number to a whole number, it's still going to be irrational. So that's going to be my answer. Okay, number 4, the solution set to the equation. We're going to find this. So to solve an equation that's already in vertex form, it's nice and easy. We're going to set it equal to 0. So let's move my 25 over. Oh my gosh, my cats are so annoying. X minus 2 squared, 9 minus 25 gives me negative 16 equals 0. Okay, and now I'm going to solve, so I'm actually going to be bringing this over here. So plus 16. Oh, marron. X minus 2 squared equals 16. Now we take the square root of both sides. And remember that when we take the square root, we have to account for both positive and the negative versions. So we're going to break it up. X minus 2 equals positive 4, and x minus 2 equals negative 4. Adding 2 to both sides, I find my first 0 is 6. And on the other side, it is negative 2. So my solution set is negative 2, 6, which is choice 3. Okay, for number 5, Which equation shown below would have the same solution set as x squared minus 6x plus 1 equals 0? The easiest way to do this, guys, is to take this and put it in vertex form and see which one it matches. So remember, in order to get something in vertex form, you just have to complete the square. So take your middle term, negative 6 divided by 2, negative 3, and square it. Okay, so right here you can actually, without solving the whole thing, you can see which one is your answer. And you can do that by noticing when you write your perfect square trinomial, that's the number that you're using, right? So x minus 3 is only here in one option, so you know it's going to be 1. But I will continue just in case you didn't notice that. So you're going to add your 9 and subtract your 9. Bring down the plus 1 equals 0. Okay, you replace this with the perfect square, so it's x minus 3 squared, and then this is minus 8 equals 0. And then hopefully you would see it by then, and if not, you would keep going to add 8 to both sides, and you'll see x minus 3 squared equals 8. Okay? Number 6, the solutions to the quadratic equation x squared minus 4x minus 10 equals 0 are. Now, obviously, if your possibility of answers are all irrational numbers like this, then you're not going to try to double bubble it here, because if you're doing double bubble, you'll have 2 whole numbers. Okay, so if these are the answers I'm getting, then that means I must have to use the quadratic equation. Okay, so negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I'm just going to write these. So a is 1, b is negative 4, c is negative 10. So it's negative b, so negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 4 squared, minus 4ac. So 4 times 1 times negative 10 all over 2a. 2 times 1. Okay. So now this is equal to positive 4 plus or minus 16, and then negative 4 times 1 times negative 10 is positive 40, all over 2. Okay, now this gives me x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 56 over 2. Okay, so I want to simplify this 56 because I don't see it here. Okay, and if you remember from a previous lesson, it was 4 and 14. And of course you can check in your calculators for that. Divided by 2. And that's x equals 4 plus or minus 2, because the square root of 4 is 2. Rad 14 over 2. And now I just have to simplify this. I can divide 2 into 4 and 2 into 2. So that gives me x equals 2 plus or minus 1 times radical 14, or just rad 14. And that's going to be my answer, which is choice 3. Okay? Guys, even though it's multiple choice, if you show your work for these, I can give you partial credit if you get it wrong. If you just circle an answer and there's no work there, I can't get you any points if you get it wrong. So it's automatically 2 points off, which is no bueno. All right, number 7, which of the following is the value of this expression? This is just seeing if you know your perfect squares and your perfect cubes here, basically. So 6, let me just rewrite it. 6 rad 4 plus 7 times the cube root of negative 8. So what you're going to do is you're going to basically just follow PEMDAS, and you're going to do the square roots and cube roots first. So this is 6 times the square root of 4, which is 2. So it's 6 times 2 plus 7 times the cube root of negative 8, which we learned in a previous lesson was negative 2. And if you don't know that off the top of your head, you use your calculator. Okay? You can also plug this directly into your calculator and you'll get the answer. But that's a side note. 6 times 2 is 12, and 7 times negative 2 is negative 14. And 12 plus negative 14 is negative 2. And that's choice 2. Just to show you real quick, it is possible to do this. You can do 6 times the square root of 4, just like that, then you have to use your arrow to get out, and then plus 7. And to get the cube root, you go back into math, go down to 4. 7 times the cube root of 8. No, negative 8, sorry. Just make sure you're out of the square root sign, and then push enter, and you get your answer. Okay? Problem is, if you make a mistake in the calculator, and you just circle an answer, and it's wrong, I can't give you partial credit. If you write this out, and I see your tiny mistake, like let's say you accidentally wrote positive 2 here, I would be able to give you points. Okay, numero ocho. Which of the following are the zeros of this function? 8x squared, excuse me, 8x squared minus 19x plus 6. If you take a look at this, you might be thinking, oh, I can factor this, or I can complete the square, or in this case, your best bet, as messy as it is the quadratic formula, okay? If you look at the two first numbers here, to factor it, you don't have any common factors here, and completing the square is going to be a hot mess. Trying to solve that, because you have the 8 in front of the x squared, is going to make a big mess. So really the best way to do this is to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so a is equal to 8, b is negative 19, and c is 6. Okay, so x equals negative b, so negative 19 plus or minus square root of b squared, negative 19 squared, minus 4ac, so 4 times 8 times 6. Okay, all over 2a, so in this case a is 8. Okay, so we're going to get x equals 19 plus or minus negative 19 squared minus 4 times 8 times 6. Okay, and I already plugged this into my calculator and I got 169. And what you'll see is that this is going to work out quite nicely. Okay, and this is all over 16. The square root of 169 is 13. Okay, 13 times 13 is 169. So this turns into 19 plus or minus 13 over 16. So I can't simplify this, so I'm going to now split it up into my two possibilities. The first being 19 plus 13 over 16, and the second is x equals 19 minus 13 over 16. Okay, so 19 plus 13 is 32 over 16, and that's equal to 2. That's my first possibility. And then 19 minus 13 gives me 6 over 16, and reducing that, we can divide them both by 2, so that's going to give me 3/8. And if you remember, guys, if you're not sure how to simplify your fraction, just to remind you, 6/16, put your fraction in, do alpha y equals 6/16. Okay, it will automatically simplify it for you. If you have it as a division problem, so like 16 divided by 6 divided by 16, you do math, enter, and you'll get the same thing. Okay, but if you put your fractions into alpha y equals, it'll automatically simplify it for you every time. Okay, so my solution set is x equals 3/8 and x equals 2, so that's choice 1. Okay. Number 9, which of the following is true about the zeros of this function? X squared plus 8x plus 3, so again, you can look at it, you might be saying, oh, it's 1, so I should double bubble it, but stop and think for a second. Your factors are going to be factors of 3. You're not going to be able to find two numbers that multiply together to 3 that also add up to 8, so you can't double bubble here, okay? So anytime you have to solve to find zeros, guys, you can use the quadratic formula every single time. I know some people prefer using it because it always gives you an answer. You don't have to do too much manipulating. A question like this, though, if you wanted to complete the square, if you like that method better, you can do that. So let's just see what happens. This time you can use quadratic formula, and in this case it'll be pretty easy. But I am going to show one completing the square just to show you that there's, of course, you can pick what method you want to use. Okay, so if I complete the square, what I need to do, of course, is first set it equal to 0, and I'm taking my middle term, divide by 2, that's 4, and square it, which is 16. I'm adding and subtracting the 16, so I get 8x plus 16, and now minus 16 plus the 3 equals 0. Okay, now this turns into my perfect square trinomial, which is x plus 4 squared, and then this is minus 13 equals 0. Now if you prefer using this method, it's because you like using inverse operations most likely. So this is x plus 4 squared equals 13. Okay, we have to take the square root of both sides. The problem here is that it's up to you to remember to include the following: plus or minus the square root of 13. In your quadratic formula, it's included for you, so you don't have to remember it. So you have to remember to do this on your own. Okay, so I don't have to find anything exact. I just have to say what kind of zeros these are. So you could even stop here because you know that this is going to be irrational. However, if you want to keep going, you can see that this is x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 13. So since the square root of 13 is an irrational number, it's not a perfect square, an irrational number plus a rational number is still always going to be irrational. So this is telling us that our zeros are going to be irrational numbers, so choice 3. Okay, let's move on to our part 2 questions. For number 10, we're just going to solve the quadratic equation and then express my answer in simplest form. Okay, so this is already in vertex form for me, so it's kind of set up really nicely. I'm already here. I'm just going to take the square root of both sides, and I have to remember that I'm accounting for the positive and the negative square root here. Okay, so before I keep going, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify this quickly. I know that I can get 200 by doing square root of 100 times the square root of 2. Okay, so this is going to give me my x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus 10 radical 2, because the square root of 100 is 10, right? And now I subtract 4 from both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus 10 radical 2. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the answer. Okay. Number 11, explain why the function g of x equals x minus 9 will not have a y-intercept. So remember, your y-intercept is where x equals 0, right? So in order to find that, I would need to find g of 0, which would be 0 minus 9, which would be the square root of negative 9. So one thing that we learned is that we cannot have a negative square root. Okay. Okay, and so we won't have a y-intercept there, because what we are being told is that there is no real possibility here where x is equal to 0. And remember that that's totally possible, because if you have a graph, there is a chance that your quadratic equation will never touch the y-axis, okay? So it's definitely possible. All right, moving on to part 3 questions. Number 12, we're almost done, guys. The quadratic function shown below has this form, x plus h squared plus k. We're going to decide what the values of h and k are first. And don't let yourself get confused. H and k are just the coordinates of your turning point, and that's it. So what we have here is our turning point. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and down 1, 2, 3. So this is 4, comma 3, negative 3, sorry. That's my turning point. Okay, but just keep in mind that when we're looking at a parabola, it's x plus h, okay? So it's been shifted. So it's been shifted to the right 4 times. So in order to show that, that would look like this, x minus right? 4. So let me write that down here. This would look like, oh boy, I'm so sorry. This would look like the following. X minus 4 squared minus 3. Okay, so h is going to be negative 4 and k is negative 3. Okay. Point A is the smaller zero of f of x. Algebraically determine its value to the nearest hundredth and show how you arrived at your answer. So right here, they're showing us point A on the graph. It's the smaller zero. You can see that it's pretty close to 2, but it's not quite at 2, so we're going to try to find it ourselves. And we already have this written in vertex form, so let's just use it. So we have x minus 4 squared minus 3 equals 0. And let's solve it and find the smaller zero. So add 3 to both sides. X minus 4 squared equals 3. Take the square root of both sides. X minus 4 is equal to plus or minus square root of 3. Add 4 to both sides, and you get x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 3. So obviously the smaller one is going to be 4 minus the square root of 3, not 4 plus the square root of 3. So that's going to be the smaller zero. And just plug it right in your calculator. 4 minus the square root of 3. Oops. Oh, what did I do? Square root of 3. And now I'm writing 2. I can't do this at the same time, I'm telling you. Okay, and we get 2.2679. 2.2679. We're rounding to the nearest hundredth. So look at your hundredth spot. Look next door. Raise the score. So it's 2.27. And that would be your answer. Okay. Okay. Finally, last 2 questions. Let's get this done. Number 13, a projectile is released from the ground height y equals 0, at an unknown point in time. Its vertical height above the ground is given by h equals negative 16 t squared plus 108 t minus 25, where h is the height of the projectile in feet and t is the time in seconds. So h is our y and t is our x. Algebraically determine to the nearest tenth of a second how long the object is in the air. Okay, so in order to figure this out, what we're trying to find is we're trying to find how long it's in the air, so we need to find the 2 zeros. And once we know the 2 zeros, we're going to know what time it started and what time it ended. Okay, and to figure out how long it's been in the air, we're going to take when it ended and we're going to subtract it. So we're going to find the end time and we're going to subtract the start time from it to figure out how long it's been in the air. Okay, so to find those 2 numbers, we need to find the zeros. So you can pick whatever method you'd like to use for this, but I will tell you that the most straightforward method in general when you have large numbers like this is to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so I'm going to do it that way. So it's going to be h equals, first I'll say a, b, and c. A is negative 16, b is 108, and c is negative 25. So negative b, so it's negative 108 plus or minus square root of b squared, 108 squared, minus 4ac, so negative 16, negative 25, all over 2a, or 2 times negative 16. Okay, plug this all into your calculator. Well, I'm going to leave the negative 108 plus or minus. And now I'll show you how you can just plug this whole thing in at once. Okay, 108 squared, so put it in parentheses, 108 squared, okay, minus 4 times, use your parentheses, negative 16, close your parentheses, open your parentheses, negative 25. And you get 10,064. And that's all over 2 times negative 16, which is negative 32. Okay? So now we are doing this to the nearest tenth of a second, so we don't need to worry about simplifying. So all we're going to do is we're going to split this up. So we're going to do h is equal to negative 108 plus the square root of 10,064 over negative 32, and h is equal to negative 108 minus square root of 10,064 over negative 32. And we're going to find our 2. This whole time I was doing h equals, this is supposed to be t, sorry. Not h, silly me. T, 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 and t. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, I'm just going to use my calculator for this, okay? Make my life a little easier. So I'll show you the best way to do this. Negative 108 plus the square root of 10,064, okay, and push enter. And then once you have your answer, then divide by negative 32, and you get 0.2400, and so on. It's asking us to round to the nearest tenth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it like this just for now, and then when I subtract, I will get a closer answer. Okay, and now this second one here, negative 108 minus this time, square root of 10,064, and now I'm going to divide by negative 32, and this time I get 6.5099. So that's 5099 da-di-da-di-da. Okay. So now if I'm going to do this to the nearest tenth, excuse me, I'm going to take my end time. What this is representing, just so you guys know, is that it started here at 0.2. We'll round it to the nearest tenth, 0.2. And it's ending here at 6.5. So to figure out how long it's been in the air, we're just going to subtract the end time minus the start time. So 6.5 minus 0.2 is going to give us 6.3 seconds. And that's the answer. So it seems really complicated, but all you're really doing is just finding the zeros and then subtracting. Okay? And finally, number 14, we're going to graph this function on the grid below and show the table. You can either do it by hand or use a calculator. I suggest that you use the calculator. Okay, so you're going to go into y equals. Okay, and you're going to put this whole thing in your calculator. Just be super careful. So negative 2 plus 3, and now you get your radical sign. Oh dear, I put 33. If you ever need to erase something, you can just push delete instead of clear. And then x plus 5 goes inside here, so x plus 5. Make sure you get out of your square root. And now we're going to look at a table before we graph. And we want to try to find whole number values. So, okay, so you see it's going to start saying error. We can't go any further than that. So negative 5 and negative 2, that's going to be my first one. So let's do xy. Okay, so let's do negative 5 and negative 2. And then let's see another one. We can find negative 4 and 1. Negative 1 or positive 1, what did I say? Positive 1. Okay, negative 4 and 1. And negative 1 and 4. Oh, 4 and 7. And that should really be enough. If we keep going, it's going to be too big. Yeah, we could do 11 and 10, but I don't think we have enough boxes. So we'll leave it at this. Okay, and we'll plot these points. Also, let's take a just quick peek at our graph before we move on. I'm going to do zoom standard so we can see. Okay, you can see your square root function. it's been shifted to the left 5 times, just like it says it should be, and then down 2. Okay, so -5 and -2, of course we're going to label on our test, right guys? Okay. I've been only labeling every other 2 just in the interest of time, since I'm constantly spending time labeling in these videos, it seems. Slightly better. Okay, so -5 and -2. Here's -5 and -2. -4 and 1. -1 and 4. And 4 and 7. Connect. And that's your graph. You just want to label it. -2 plus 3 rad x plus 5. Okay, and now the last thing we have to do is state the range. Okay, so remember, range is y values. So we look and we state it from the bottom up. Okay, so you look at the very bottom of your graph and you look up to state your range. So the graph is beginning at -2. Okay, and that value is included, and it's going up to infinity. We have an arrow here, we can't be sure when it ends, so you can write it like that, or you can write y greater than or equal to -2. Either one of these is fine. Okay, and that is our last question. Okay, all right, so this is everything, guys. You'll notice that on the test here, we only have part 3 questions, okay, instead of a part 4 question. Okay, so it's slightly different than what we've usually been doing, okay? But this is it. That's the end. All right, so practice. I put an extra review practice test up for you guys in case you want to try another one. If you're curious about anything, there's office hours later today from 12 to 12:40. So if you have any questions for me, you can pop in and ask. Okay, guys, have fun reviewing.